Whispers in empty rooms, the Blackwood estate loomed against the main coastline like a monument to grief. Its windows, once bright with laughter, now reflected only gray skies and the occasional seabird. Inside, the grand piano in the music room remained draped in heavy fabric. Untouched for 27 months, Samuel Blackwood stood at his study window, watching the slim figure approach along the winding driveway. Her auburn hair caught the weak autumn sunlight as she paused to take in the Gothic revival architecture of the house. He checked his watch. She was precisely on time, which was more than could be said for the last 4 caretakers. Mr. Blackwood. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, appeared at his door. "Miss Quinn has arrived." Samuel nodded without turning. "Show her to the library. I'll be down shortly." When he entered the library 10 minutes later, Eleanora Quinn was examining the bookshelves, her fingers tracing the spines of his rare music. Theory collection. She didn't immediately turn or startle at his entrance, just finished reading the title she was examining before facing him. "Your collection is impressive," she said, her voice softer than he expected, with a lilting cadence. That suggested she might sing her words, if given the chance. "My wife's collection," he corrected. "I'm Samuel Blackwood. It's Eleanora Quinn." She extended her hand. "No wedding ring," he noted automatically. Her grip was firm, her palms calloused in a pattern he recognized immediately. "You play piano?" It wasn't a question, a slight smile. "Among other things," Samuel gestured to the leather chairs by the fireplace. "Your resume is sparse, Miss Quinn. No formal childcare qualifications. No references from prominent families. Yet you claim you can help my son when specialists from Boston to New York have failed." Eleanora settled into the chair, smoothing her simple navy dress. "I didn't claim I could fix him, Mr. Blackwood. Children aren't broken clocks to be repaired. Oliver hasn't spoken a word since his mother's accident. 2 years, 4 months, and 13 days of silence. I've exhausted every conventional option, which is why you're considering unconventional ones," she replied evenly. "Where is he now?" "The solarium. He spends most mornings there, watching the ocean." Eleanora nodded. "May I meet him? Alone, please?" Something in her quiet confidence made Samuel agree against his better judgment. He led her through the house, past Grace's portraits that he couldn't bear to remove, to the glass-walled room, where Oliver sat cross-legged on a cushion, his back to the door, small shoulders hunched as he stared at the churning Atlantic. "Oliver," Samuel said from the doorway. "This is Miss Quinn. She'll be staying with us for a while." The 7-year-old didn't turn. Samuel had expected nothing else. "I'll leave you to it," he murmured to Eleanora, then retreated to his study where he could watch them on the security monitor of precaution he'd taken with every new caretaker. To his surprise, Eleanora didn't immediately approach Oliver. Instead, she sat at the far end of the solarium, removed a small wooden flute from her bag, and began to play. The melody was strange, not quite sad, not quite hopeful, but it filled the sterile space with something Samuel hadn't heard in years: possibility. On the monitor, he watched his son's rigid posture slowly soften. Oliver didn't turn toward her, but his head tilted slightly. Like a flower seeking light, for the first time in 27 months, Samuel Blackwood felt the faintest stirring of hope. Melodies of trust. 3 weeks passed like a slow exhalation through the Blackwood estate. Eleanora had settled into a rhythm with Oliver that defied Samuel's expectations. Each morning she would join the boy in the solarium, sometimes with her wooden flute, other times with small percussion instruments, a hand drum, finger cymbals, or a rain stick that mimicked the sound of the ocean beyond the windows. She never demanded Oliver's participation, never pressed him to speak. Instead, she created what she called sound spaces, environments of gentle music, where silence wasn't an absence, but simply another note in their composition. Samuel found himself lingering in doorways, watching their sessions with the composers. Analytical mind and a father's desperate heart. "It's called receptive music therapy," Leonora explained one evening as they sat in his study, the fire crackling between them. Outside, November winds battered the coast. "Oliver doesn't have to make music himself. He just needs to exist within it until he's ready for more. And if he's never ready, Samuel asked, swirling amber liquid in his glass. Eleonora considered this, her face softened by firelight. He's already responding, Mr. Blackwood. You've noticed how he turns toward the sound now. How his breathing synchronizes with the rhythm. Samuel had noticed. He'd also noticed how his son had begun leaving small objects of blue marble, a seashell, a feather beside Eleonora's instruments each night. Tiny offerings that spoke volumes in their silence. Tell me about your training, Samuel said abruptly. Your methods are ... unorthodox. Something flickered across Eleonora's face. Caution, perhaps. I studied at Berklee College of Music, specialized in music therapy after my traditional performance track. Under Professor Henrietta Vogel, I recognize her influence in your phrasing. Eleonora's teacup paused halfway to her lips. You know Henrietta? Grace, my wife, performed with her chamber orchestra before we married, Samuel said. You're avoiding my question, Miss Quinn. Your techniques suggest far more specialized training than a standard music therapy program. Before she could answer, Mrs. Winters appeared at the door, her expression tight. Mr. Blackwood, there's something you should see. Samuel followed the housekeeper to the music room, where the grand piano stood. The heavy velvet cover had been removed, folded neatly on a nearby bench. The fallboard was open, exposing the keys that hadn't been touched since Grace's funeral. Oliver, Samuel whispered. He was just sitting there when I came to dust, Mrs. Winters said, not playing, just looking at the keys. Samuel's throat constricted. The piano had been Grace's sanctuary, her voice when words failed. After her, death. He couldn't bear the thought of music filling the house again, and each note would only emphasize her absence that night. Samuel found himself awake at 3 a.m., drawn to the hallway outside Oliver's room. He heard Eleonora's voice, soft and melodic, weaving a story about a lighthouse keeper who collected the sounds of the ocean in special bottles. What happens when the bottles get full? Oliver whispered his first words in nearly 3 years. Samuel pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself, his vision blurring. They turn into stars, Eleonora answered. That's why the night sky sings if you listen closely enough. The next morning, Samuel waited until Oliver was occupied with Mrs. Winters before confronting Eleonora in the garden. He spoke to you. Not a question. Why you? What aren't you telling me? Eleonora met his gaze steadily. Children speak when they have something to say, and someone who will truly listen. It's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. She hesitated, then added, I once knew silence like Oliver's. Music was my way back. Before Samuel could press further, a small hand slipped into his. Oliver stood between them, holding a crumpled sheet of paper. On it, he had drawn 3 stick figures, a tall one with wild hair like Samuel's, a small one in the middle, and a third with what appeared to be a flute in hand. At the bottom, in childish scrawl, are songs. Samuel knelt before his son, heart thundering. Is this us, Oliver? The boy nodded solemnly. It's beautiful, Samuel managed. Oliver turned to Eleonora. Can we play today? At the big piano? Over the child's head, Samuel's eyes met Eleonora's. In her gaze, he saw understanding. Secrets still carefully guarded. Crescendo of Truth December arrived with snow that transformed the Blackwood estate into a crystalline fortress. Inside, the house had awakened from its long dormancy. Music spilled from the previously silent rooms, Oliver picking out simple melodies on the grand piano, Eleonora's flute-weaving counterpoint, and occasionally, almost despite himself, Samuel, adding his own compositions to their daily scapt. Oliver now spoke regularly, though still selectively and primarily to Eleonora. Each word felt like a gift, a small miracle that Samuel catalogued with composer's precision. On a particularly bitter evening, Samuel found Eleonora in the library, poring over an old music journal. Her finger traced a photograph, a younger version of herself standing beside a renowned conductor, Emmett Caldwell. You performed with the London Philharmonic, Samuel said from the doorway. Wasn't a question this time. Eleonora closed the journal carefully. A lifetime ago. 8 years to be precise. You were Caldwell's protege, the next great classical pianist. Until the Dresden performance, Samuel entered the room fully. I've been researching you, Eleonora Quinn. Or, should I say Eleonora Ritchie? She met his gaze unflinchingly. I don't use that name anymore. You walked off stage during Rachmaninoff's third concerto, never performed publicly again. The music world called it a nervous breakdown. He sat across from her. Why are you here, in my home, with my son? The truth this time. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing Samuel's demand. Eleonora's hands, those gifted hands that could coax music from silence, trembled slightly. I saw your advertisement by chance. When I read about Oliver, about his silence. She looked toward the window, where lightning illuminated the churning sea. I recognized it. Recognized what? The quality of his silence. After my mother died, I didn't speak for nearly a year. And after Dresden, ... She met his eyes. Some silences come from grief, others from terror. Both need different kinds of listening. Samuel leaned forward. What happened in Dresden? Manic. Perfectionism. Pressure. She gave a hollow laugh. Pick your poison. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move my fingers. The music, the thing I loved most, became my prison. So you ran. I healed, she corrected sharply. I studied music therapy, worked in hospitals with trauma patients. I found purpose in helping. Others find their voices. Thunder crashed directly overhead, shaking the windows. A moment later, Oliver appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. The storm monster, he whispered. Without hesitation, Samuel opened his arms. To his shock, Oliver ran to him, burrowing against his chest. It was the first time his son had voluntarily touched him since Grace's funeral. It's just sound, buddy, Samuel murmured into his son's hair. Like Miss Quinn teaches us, sound can't hurt you. Eleonora moved to the piano in the corner of the library, a smaller instrument than the grand in the music room. Her fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain. Play, Samuel encouraged softly. Show him how to transform fear. She began Debussy's Clair de Lune, her touch delicate as moonlight. Samuel recognized the technical brilliance beneath her restraint, the years of training, the innate gift that had made her famous. As the thunder receded, Oliver's breathing steadied. He lifted his head from Samuel's chest and whispered, Daddy, it sounds like stars. Samuel's eyes met Eleonora's over his son's head. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared wounds, of parallel journeys through grief toward an uncertain healing. Later, after Oliver had fallen asleep between them on the library sofa, Samuel asked quietly, Why didn't you tell me who you were? Eleonora smiled sadly. Famous failures don't make compelling resumes, Mr. Blackwood. Samuel, he corrected. I think we're beyond formalities, don't you? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line made his blood freeze. Eleonora Ricci's current whereabouts sexclusive story opportunity. A journalist had found her. Dissonant Secrets January brought brittle, cold, and unwelcome intrusions to the Blackwood estate. The email Samuel had received was from Preston Hargrove, notorious culture vulture who specialized in exposing the private lives of fallen artists. Somehow, he'd connected Eleonora to the Blackwood household and was threatening to publish. A Where Are They Now? Exposed that would drag her back into an unwanted spotlight. Ignore him, Eleonora insisted, when Samuel showed her the increasingly demanding messages. My breakdown is old news. But Samuel, who had spent years protecting his family's privacy after Grace's accident, recognized the predatory tone in Hargrove's communications. He won't stop. Men like this thrive on vulnerabilities. They were in the music room, watching. Oliver methodically arranged colored pencils on the piano bench according to the musical scale red for C, orange for D, and so on through the rainbow. The boy's progress had been remarkable. He now spoke in full sentences, laughed during their impromptu trio sessions, and had even begun attending video lessons with a specialized tutor, but shadows still haunted him. Any disruption to his carefully constructed routine could trigger withdrawal. The thought of a journalist invading their sanctuary made Samuel's jaw clench. There's more to your Dresden story, isn't there? Samuel asked quietly. something beyond stage fright. Eleonora's fingers stilled on the flute she'd been cleaning. "Samuel, I need to know what we're facing," he pressed. "If this man publishes his story, it wasn't just panic," she interrupted, her voice barely audible. "My mother had just died cancer. I was her caretaker for months. The Dresden performance was my triumphant return after her death. My manager insisted I was ready. Her laugh was bitter. I wasn't. It's understandable grief, not scandal."
Oh.
The scandal came after. She set down her flute with deliberate care. "I was hospitalized for what they called exhaustion. In reality, I'd become dependent on anti-anxiety medication. My recovery double is in toto. The classical music world doesn't forgive mental health struggles or addiction. They want perfect vessels for the music, not flawed humans." Understanding dawned on Samuel, and Hargrove knows this. She nodded. "He wants to position me as a cautionary tale. The gifted pianist who cracked under pressure, now reduced to nannying for the wealthy." "Reduced?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you see your work with Oliver?" Before she could answer, Oliver appeared between them, tugging Eleonora's sleeve. "The colors don't want to make music today," he said, frustration evident. "Sometimes that happens," she responded gently. "What can we do instead?" Oliver's brow furrowed in serious consideration. "Tell me about the storm bottles again." Eleonora led Oliver back to his color project. Samuel retreated to his study. He stared at his computer screen, at the latest email from Hargrove, requesting an interview with the reclusive composer and his mysterious employee. With sudden resolve, Samuel began composing a response not to Hargrove, but to his own publicist whom he hadn't contacted in years. If Hargrove wanted a story, Samuel would ensure it wasn't the one he expected. The next morning, Samuel found Eleonora in the kitchen, staring at her phone in disbelief. "What have you done?" she whispered, turning the screen toward him. It showed an announcement from the Regional Symphony, one night only, Samuel Blackwood premieres, new composition with special guest. "I'm fighting fire with fire," Samuel explained. "Hargrove wants to expose you. Let's control the narrative by dragging me on stage." Her voice rose, catching with panic. "I haven't performed publicly in 8 years. You perform every day." With Oliver, Samuel countered, "This piece I'm writing, it's for you, for him, for what you've created here." "You can't just decide this for me," she said, anger replacing shock. "This is exactly what happened before people making decisions about my career, my recovery, my life." Oliver appeared in the doorway, his small face crumpling at their raised voices. Without a word, he turned and fled. The silence that followed was deafening. "Now look what we've done," Eleonora whispered. Harmony restored February brought thawing ice and tentative reconciliations to the Blackwood estate. After their argument, Eleonora had retreated to her room for a full day before emerging with quiet determination. "I'll do the performance," she told Samuel, "but on my terms. And we need to prepare Oliver. Any change frightens him." They agreed to involve Oliver in the process, making him feel secure rather than abandoned. Samuel converted part of his studio into a practice space where the three of them could work together on his new composition, a piece he'd titled Silences Between Stars. "It's structured around negative space," Samuel explained, as he showed Eleonora the score. "The pauses between notes are as important as the notes themselves." "Like the spaces between words," she murmured, understanding immediately. The composition was unlike anything Samuel had written before. His previous work had been mathematically precise, technically brilliant, but emotionally guarded. This piece breathed with vulnerability, each movement charting their journey grief, isolation, tentative connection, and the fragile hope of renewal. Oliver became their unofficial assistant, arranging music sheets and occasionally suggesting color-coded notations that made surprising musical sense. His speech continued to improve, especially when engaged in their creative process. "Will people listen to our music?" he asked one evening as they practiced. "Yes," Samuel answered. "Does that worry you?" Oliver considered this seriously. "Have to be quiet to hear the spaces," he finally declared. Eleonora smiled. "That's exactly right." As the performance date approached, Preston Hargrove continued his pursuit, publishing a small piece speculating about the mysterious collaboration between the reclusive composer and the disappeared pianist. But Samuel's strategy was working by announcing the performance on their own terms. Odd. They'd transformed potential scandal into artistic intrigue. The night before the concert, Samuel found Eleonora in the solarium, her flute untouched beside her as she watched the stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, joining her on the window seat. "A symphony of them," she admitted, "but also anticipation. I never thought I'd feel that again." Samuel's hand found hers in the darkness. "You gave Oliver his voice back. And mine. He was always going to find his way back," she said. "He just needed the right conditions. Safety, patience, someone who understood his particular silence." "And what about you?" Samuel asked quietly. "Have you found your way back?" Leonora turned to him, her face silvered by starlight. "Not back. Forward." Her fingers tightened around his.
"Oh."
"There's a difference." The regional concert hall was intimidatingly full the following evening. Samuel had arranged for Mrs. Winters to bring Oliver only for the performance itself, protecting him from the overwhelming crowd. Backstage, Eleonora paced in a simple black dress, her auburn hair swept into an elegant knot. "If I freeze, ... double quotes," she began. "You won't," Samuel said firmly. "But if you do, I'll be right there. We'll find our way through together." When they walked in stage, the applause was polite but curious. Samuel took his place at the piano while Eleonora stood beside it, flute poised. As the lights dimmed, he caught sight of Oliver in the front row, clutching Mrs. Winters' hand, his eyes wide with wonder. The piece began with Samuel alone, sparse melody that spoke of isolation. Gradually, Eleonora's flute entered, hesitant at first, then growing more confident as the music evolved. By the third movement, they were engaged in a complex dialogue of sound and silence, loss and discovery. In the audience, Oliver leaned forward, entranced. When the final movement began, the section Samuel had titled "Voice Smiled." In recognition, this was the melody Eleonora had played on her first day at the estate, transformed into a celebration of renewed connection as the final notes faded. There was a moment of profound silence before thunderous applause erupted. Samuel rose and extended his hand to Eleonora, who was smiling through tears. They bowed together, then gestured to the front row where Oliver stood on his seat, lapping with unrestrained joy. Later that night, as they drove back to the estate, Oliver sleeping in the back seat, Eleonora said quietly, "Hargrove was in the audience. He approached me afterward." Samuel tensed. What did he want? To apologize, surprisingly. "He said he'd been pursuing the wrong story." She laughed softly. Apparently, acclaimed pianist finds redemption through music therapy makes a better headline than whatever scandal he'd imagined. Samuel took her hand across the console. "And what happens now?" Now Eleonora glanced back at Oliver, then at Samuel. "Now we keep making music, keep finding our voices." Her smile deepened. "Keep listening to the silences between stars." In the rearview mirror, Samuel saw Oliver stir, his eyes opening to the night sky above their homeward path. The boy's lips moved in quiet song no longer silent, no longer afraid, ready for whatever symphony awaited them.